like this part right here. Come on. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the on till victory is won. Now we add a little something to it. Just to encourage you. We're gonna take you to church later. Let's go! We'll keep marching right until the victory is won. To all my brothers out there. Hold your head up, brother, till the victory is won. To all my sisters in the struggle. Keep believing, sister, till the victory is won. Till that day. Till that day comes. Hey. Let us march on. To victory. Till victory is won. Is won.
Let us march on till victory is won. Greetings and welcome to Social Living. It's the Money Matters edition of Social Living and the first one for the month of July 2021. My name is Carlisle McKetty and I expect to be joined shortly by our co-host Seba Dimani. And this is the Money Matters edition of Social Living. How are you? Greetings and welcome. Well, it's been quite a week and a weekend, and of course, America just got through celebrating its, 245th, I believe, birthday? Something like that, something in that area. And, well, of course, 2 weeks before that was the celebration of Juneteenth, which kind of was snuck in the last minute. It's the first official Juneteenth holiday. But let's see what happens next year. I don't know what it's going to be like next year and how folks' loyalties, I guess, will be divided or not divided. I don't know. It's kind of snuck up on us this year, but I imagine it's going to be, I don't know. I don't know. I'm just thinking that something is supposed to happen. You know, it just happened that Juneteenth came and went and 4th of July came and went, and unless I'm in the dark, really, and which I might well be, that's a whole nother matter. I might well be in the dark with regard to what's going on, but I just thought I'd mention that because it occurred to me that it's a little bit strange, or not even strange, but something's, I don't know, y'all. Just jump in the chat room and let me know your thoughts. In the meantime, I think we've been joined by Seba Dimani, so I can see if I can bring him in. I hope he's been hearing my rambling and would have something to add as soon as we can get him into the picture. So let's see. Seba Dimani, how are you?
Peace, I'm fine, man. How are you?
I am good. Greetings and welcome to the Money Matters edition of Social Living for July 2021. And I was just saying that, well, this year for the first time, there was an official federal Juneteenth holiday. And of course, it's been some 240 some odd years that America has been celebrating Independence Day. And I don't know if there's anything to be made of the of that reality. But what are your thoughts? And I wish you had some more light in that room because it.
Hold on. Let me see. For some reason, my camera is always it always looks kind of blurry. This is the second week in a row it's been looking blurry. Before then, it was all right.
Well, did you clean the lens?
It just did.
And did you adjust the lighting in the camera itself? The camera itself?
I didn't change anything. It's like it just happened. You know.
Okay, that's much better anyway. So, yes, Saber, I'm asking about the Juneteenth or the coexistence, I guess, of Juneteenth and Independence Day, and within 2 weeks of each other, 2 to 3 weeks of each other. What do you make of that?
I don't think it's going to be a problem.
I don't know if it's going to be a problem, but it's new. How will it?
I mean, before they made it to a holiday, there were already a number of states that were already celebrating it. So those people are just going to continue to do it, and feel more freer. And then the states that weren't celebrating it, I'm pretty sure they're going to jump on the bandwagon. So I think it's going to, there may be some people who may see it as a conflict with the 4th of July, like the same people that see Kwanzaa and Christmas, posing a conflict. But this might be a little different in the sense that it has longer roots in Juneteenth has longer roots in the country than, let's say, Kwanzaa did when it was first developed.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I guess we will wait until next year, and we will see. We will experience it. We will see.
It did sneak up on. Well, it didn't sneak up on us as much as it was passed leading right up to the holiday. And I wasn't sure if it was gonna be celebrated this year or not because it was so close.
Well, that's what I mean. It is so close, and it is. There was no fanfare this year. Will there be fanfare next year? How will the Pan-African community deal with it, and how has the Pan-African community dealt with the 4th of July? I guess clearly the International African Arts Festival has kind of hitched their wagon to the 4th of July.
They've always coincided with it, yes.
I'm sorry?
Their celebration has always coincided with the 4th.
Right. And so does that require reconsideration, or will it continue to be what it has traditionally been? And why has it been connected to the 4th, I guess, would be the first question.
I don't know, because you think about it, I mean, school has kind of it's the first weekend, about a week after school has just ended. And remember, originally, it was right after school. It was a celebration. So it wasn't, the earlier celebrations, I'm not sure if they coincided with the 4th. I know as it got larger and larger, it began to coincide. But if you remember, for a couple of years, the festival was 10 days. So it went even beyond, 10 days, it was 8 days. I think that was just too much. That's when they just...
Who is it that did this poem called Ego Tripping? Ntozake Shange? Was that Ntozake Shange?
I'm not sure, but it sounds like something she would say.
Or anyway, there was this poem called Ego Tripping that talked about all the glorious things of Africa, and Hannibal sneezed and delivered whatever. So yeah, I say all of that to say that 10 days was a little bit of ego tripping, because after that they swore it would never happen again, and it hasn't happened again. So
I think it was too much. They bit off more than they could chew.
It was ego tripping, and they thankfully recognized it and made the necessary adjustment.
I mean, the good thing was I think they thought that if it was so beautiful those 4 or 5 days were so beautiful, that they could extend that beauty to a week, it would be even more beautiful.
What did Shakespeare say? That surfeiting the appetite sickens and so dies? Yeah, well, sometimes it gets to be too much, and appetite sickens and dies, and that's pretty much sums up what happened that year. They did 10 days, and their appetite for putting on 10-day festivals died a quick death beyond after that one.
But they had a couple of days that were also, you know, quite a bit. I think they had 6, 7, but that was too much.
But you make a good point, though, going back to why it happens now. Let's remember that the original expression of the African Street Carnival, as it was called back then, was a school closing exercise.
Right.
And so it was the end of the semester, which kind of just tied into 4th of July, not because it was 4th of July, but because school had just ended. It was the end of June, really. And after June comes July. And they were doing this thing to mark the end of school. It was a fundraiser for the school. And so that's the history that placed it in the 4th of July time frame. And I imagine that history will continue to prevail and determine.
Also, too, tied in with the start of summer school. Because the way they do it is summer school starts like that first Monday after the 4th of July.
Yeah, it's all connected to the school. Okay, so speaking of 4th of July, how did you spend your 4th of July weekend?
I was at Carnival.
All 3 days?
I didn't make it one day because Kaisa had she sang. So we couldn't make it that day, but I was there the first day. Of course, if I'd had my way, I would have been there every day, and then we were there the last day. The last day was beautiful. I saw you out there the last day.
Yes, I was there the second and third day. I wasn't there the first day. What was the attendance like on the Friday?
The first day was light. You know, also, too, it rained.
Absolutely.
The sky had been overcast all day. Then it cleared up for a few hours. We got out there. There were a couple of nice hours. Then, of course, you know, the rain came and sort of messed things up a bit. But it was already a light crowd.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know, it was kind of light the second day as well, but the last day looked really good. It was a good look. And I certainly enjoyed Johnny Osbourne's performance. And I was disappointed in Forces of Nature, quite frankly. The dance group that ended the festival, they were there 2 or 3 years ago, and they were a different energy then than I saw this year. But hey, everything must change. So lots of stuff has been happening over the past week. Let me say greetings and welcome to Lorna Doon joining us in the chat room. And she says, greetings, CPR family. Greetings, Lorna. Glad to have you. How was your 4th of July? Maybe you can tell us in the chat room what your attitude is towards the 4th of July, as I hear from Saber what his attitude is towards the 4th of July.
Well, I typically don't celebrate. I mean, you know, I think Frederick Douglass made that declaration when he spoke about it. And I kind of like have always held to that. In fact, I think that there was a time in African American history when many folks actually had some sort of celebration on the 5th, in other words, the day after. I think that was something that was in vogue for a little while. I'm not sure how long it lasted. And then, of course, you know, you've always had Juneteenth, but that was more of a Southwest kind of experience.
In fact, someone texted me Frederick Douglass's a portion of Frederick Douglass's speech, and he was pretty much indignant. In fact, he didn't want to do it, as I understand, and he was offended. Let me just read a piece of what it says. What to the slave is the 4th of July? Would to God, both of your sakes, both for your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truly returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. For who is there so cold that a nation's sympathy could not warm him? Who so obdurate and dead to the claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge such priceless benefits? Who so, stolid and selfish that would not give his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee when the chains of servitude had been torn from his limbs? I am not that man. In a case like that, the dumb might eloquently speak and the lame man leap as an heart. But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, but not me. The sunlight that brought light and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice. I must mourn. Frederick Douglass, July 5, 1852. So, Uncle Fred was not happy, was not having it, and really didn't even want to be there and felt offended that he was asked to come speak at this 4th of July when his people were still enslaved. This is 1852, 11 years before the Emancipation Proclamation and 13 years before Juneteenth, when the last of the enslaved folks learned of it. How do we fast forward? Okay, so there was an Emancipation Proclamation. Do we now take back Frederick Douglass's words and say, no, we're included? Or do we say, or what do we say? What do you say?
I mean, you know, I always remain sort of ambivalent. In other words, I'd rather just go ahead and do Juneteenth and July 5th and other things like that, because they're part of our distinct history. You want to include us, you want to act like now, you know, we should respect that date when, I mean, the moods and sentiment of this country are still very anti-African. But again, you know, there are people who celebrate it because of the distinct history and struggle that Africans have played in this country. And I guess, you know, for them, they'll make it into, they'll see it as a separate sort of celebration. Let me explain what I mean.
Please.
So you know, I've never really celebrated, well, you know, when I was young, I grew up, we celebrated Thanksgiving. And once I became very political, and I think I read the Reverend Barashango's book on African people and European holidays, I began to stop celebrating Thanksgiving. And I associated with, you know, let me cut that off. I associated with the Pilgrims and, you know, the genocide of the Native Americans. And so I didn't celebrate it. And then as time went on, it was like increasing alienation. My family, because it was me and my brother who stopped going. It was a political statement. It kind of stuck out. People were talking about us. It's not like the family got together all the time anyway. So in the end, I realized that, well, for African people in this country, Thanksgiving is not really a celebration of that first Thanksgiving with Native Americans. It's really a celebration of family, and in this sense, of our families. So I began to view Thanksgiving totally separate from this whole pilgrim nonsense and the first survival of the pilgrims. And I saw it as a celebration of the African American family. And so I think that some people will take the 4th of July and not necessarily see it as a celebration of the birth of the nation, but if anything, see it as a celebration of our continued struggle and and maybe even sort of our victory, or we're in the process of becoming fully included. So I think people will make up in their mind what they want from it. I don't really celebrate it, but again, what happens is I have a family member who always throws an event on the 4th, and everybody attends. So it's like, because I'm such a family person and my family's fairly tight, I can't be the one that's not there again, make me look bad. So I end up attending, but again, at the event, there's no talk about, the nation and the struggles. It's just people enjoying family, laughing, loving, and that's it. So, there's no American flag out. So it's kind of different. It's funny when when you are part of this country but you've been excluded. If you have a history of struggle and a history that's even unique, then you kind of get caught up in these celebrations where you're going to celebrate because you're a part of the country, you're part of the history, but the celebration is going to be in a different vein. It's going to have a different focus. And usually it's always going to be about the triumph of family more than anything else.
So for you, you said that's what it is. So what was it for your family member who hosted this event? Was it hosted as a celebration of American independence, or was it hosted as a family gathering, taking advantage of the holiday when you're free to get together?
Yes, it was a family gathering.
Exactly. So I don't know that I would shy away from being there because it had nothing to do with celebrating independence. It had to do with celebrating family.
And I'm always there, But the point is just that it happened to be on the 4th.
Yeah, well,
I'm always there because I understand that it was never a celebration about Independence Day.
Greetings and welcome to Renee Florence, who says, hi, be right back. Okay, I guess she's back because she said, I bought that book 2 or 3 times. Can't find them anymore. And I imagine since the only book we talked about was the Reverend Shaka Musa Barashanga's book about celebrating European holidays, I imagine that's the book that Renee is speaking of. You did mention Shaka Musa Barashanga's book about celebrating holidays, and well, he goes in deep in that book. He does go in deep, and I'm wondering if Renee would share with us her thoughts of that book and the sentiments expressed by the good Reverend in that book about celebrating these holidays. Oops. So Renee, if she says yes, mental genocide. Yeah, sounds like the path the good Reverend went with this particular book, mental genocide. Interesting summation. Okay, well, what else is going on? Things in the news, and this evening we will look at 2 things that, it is our Money Matters edition, and we will look at 2 things that, it's not about the Secretary of the Treasury or anything like that, but it's very much a big money matter. of course, I'm speaking of the news about Bill Cosby, and Nicole Hannah-Jones is the other news item that we will look at from a Money Matters perspective. But before we get to that, well, let's take a little break and we'll come back and talk about the Black News Channel. You tell me you've been watching it, Saber?
The Black News Channel? Not regularly, no.
Okay, because I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, whether or not you have an opinion about it and its usefulness to our progress.
I'm not really. I think
Let's
I may have
let's
lost
let's come right back and talk about it. We'll be right back. Give you some time to think about it.
all right.
A coalition to preserve reggae music. Preserve reggae music. Reggae music is alive. CPR will preserve reggae music. Sing it. Preserve reggae music. Reggae music is live. Reggae music is live.
Ujama, where health is wealth. So come join us at the heart and soul of Crown Heights, Brooklyn, where you can find a wide variety of vegetarian options, vitamins, herbal bitters, natural beauty products. You can also indulge in our hot vegetarian patties, lentil, pumpkin, jerk planting. Savor our delicious vegan meals, soup prepared fresh daily. Let it be known we use strictly alkaline water here at Ujama Health Food, 406 Utica Avenue between Crown and Montgomery, 718-771-8478, where your health is wealth, at the heart and soul of Crown Heights for 27 years. That's 27 years serving the community with peace, love, and Ujama.
This is Lucian as a messenger, inviting you to support CPR, the coalition to preserve reggae and keep roots reggae music alive. CPR is a non-profit organization. Come and be a part of this. It's a wonderful celebration. Give praise to Rastafari. For more information, call 718-421-6927. That's 718-421-6927.
Okay, 718-421-6927. And of course, you know, we could open the phones and talk to y'all. If you wanted to do that, then it's a different number. It's 347-273-8131 if you'd like to tell us about the 4th of July, or if you'd like to tell us about mental genocide, or if you'd like to tell us about the Black News Channel, which is what I'm about to ask Saber to tell us his thoughts about that channel.
Well, you know, as I said, I'm not very familiar with it. I don't watch it regularly. But one thing I know is that the majority investor is not a person of African descent.
The majority of?
The majority investor, he's not of African descent.
Okay, the majority investor. Okay. Well, here we are. It's Money Matters. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's a Pakistani guy. And so I'm always, you know, leery, but, you know, we'll see.
Why? Why are you leery of the source of the funding?
Because that will dictate the content to a certain extent.
You know, we talked about Akon, for instance, building, you know, magnificent, fantastic communities in his homeland and in Uganda and across Africa,
Yeah.
using Chinese money. Is that a problem too?
Well, you know, the thing about Chinese money is that, well, you know something? You're right. It may not be a difference, But the one thing is just that the Pakistani individual, he's also Muslim, and so you're concerned about maybe even some I know some of those influences. The Chinese come in pretty much and let you do what you have to do. In other words, their imperialism has been almost like, at this point, it's been sort of like a hands-off thing. They don't care what you do as long as you support them in the UN and pay them back.
Well, you're sounding a little bit like the former president now, who took issue with Jeff Bezos because he owns the Washington Post, and felt like he had to go up against Jeff Bezos because he owns the Washington Post. And Jeff Bezos felt like, I'm not involved in the editorial decisions at the Washington Post. Are you suggesting that this majority shareholder is getting involved in editorial decisions at the Black News Channel?
But, and I don't know. That's why I said I'm just concerned. I don't know. I haven't seen anything yet. I mean, originally, J.C. Watts was the one that started the channel. But I guess he couldn't get enough. I mean, I don't know why he couldn't get enough black investors. I mean, I don't know what's going on. It's like Oprah Winfrey should have been able to invest.
Wait. You don't know why he couldn't get enough backing?
Huh?
You said you don't know why he couldn't get enough backing?
Enough black investors. Where it could be 100% black investors. I don't know. I don't know all the details. I mean, maybe he went to Oprah or Bill Cosby or whoever else, and they may have had some reservations. I don't know. I know that a Pakistani guy is a majority investor. That's all I know.
Mm-hmm. And it would be interesting to find out what involvement this investor has in dictating the nature of the content.
I mean, as a businessman, you can imagine that I guess it's possible for him to keep his personal positions and opinions out of the business, but that necessarily hasn't been the case. So, for example, when we look at black businesses that have a majority of Jewish financial investment, they usually engage and try to influence direction and policy. So I'm not sure.
Are you talking about media operations or just businesses in general?
Well, media operations. But even in general, I'm making a critique. Because most of the time, when you find folks that are criticizing black folks, the attack is usually anti-Semitism. You rarely hear people necessarily coming out saying that blacks taking a position that's anti-white. You hear the term anti-Semitism being thrown out much more frequently. And usually, there's some type of economic involvement with that entity. If you look at people, whenever people come out and they make a statement that's considered anti-Semitic in terms of media, they usually have to apologize or there are consequences. You saw it most recently with the Disney star who was formerly married to Mariah Carey. His name will come to me in a minute. But he made a statement. He was considered anti-Semitic. He said he was going to stand by his statement. Next thing you know, a couple of his contracts sort of tightened up, and he came back and he made an apology, but he's still in the doghouse as far as I can see.
I'm not familiar with that one. There's another one that's, well, I'm not familiar with that one. I'd like to learn some more about it. And clearly, all things are not created. Oh, Nick Cannon, says Renee Florence in the chat room. Thank you, Renee.
I was just going to look it up too. Nick Cannon, yes.
No, Renee is up on the issues here this evening. Shaka Musavar Shanga's
book. It's happened many times before.
Nick, say that again?
It's happened before. And not only that, even if you look at the whole politically correctness in terms of the gender issue, right? You remember Isaiah Washington had a thing where he used the F word. It's a shame how, yeah, the F word, right? And he had to come back in to apologize or come back correct, and he didn't, and he lost his career has been damaged. Now, the forces that were behind that are not simply Jewish forces, although they are a major force behind it, but you also have, Irish elements and all kinds of people who were behind that. But largely a coalition of Jewish people as well. So they're just things that you have to be careful in. You can't say because your career will be damaged because the media is still something that's largely influenced by non-African people.
Yeah, there's another case I heard of just today, as a matter of fact. I don't have the details, but somebody ended up losing a job for sharing some hot mic information, and the hot micer has apologized and retained her job, but the person who shared it has lost her job. And I think what I'm hearing you allude to is double standards and the just absence of justice. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, pretty much. You have to be. There's a certain position that you have to take, and you're expected to take it. And if not, you can run into trouble with your career.
Well, doesn't that take us back to the whole issue of America's independence and involvement in, I guess, pursuit of the American dream? Maybe you don't, celebrate America's independence at the barbecue, but for the next 300 and Marlene McKetty, greetings, sis. ESPN, yes. And speaking of ESPN, I heard a discussion of it on the Black News Channel today. And the sister in the morning, she was just straight up. She says, this is not even about the individuals, and sorry about the person who lost a job, and I hope she got another one or she's okay. And, I accept the apology. But the real issue is ESPN and the culture at ESPN. And as a matter of fact, wasn't it ESPN that I played that clip 3 weeks ago that we had a pretty contentious conversation about the tennis person? And
Yeah, it was ESPN.
And I thought so, and it's very consistent. Both, and like I pointed out, and the question was, should athletes be required? And of course, both commentators, it seemed to me, were simply towing the line and doing exactly what ESPN would have them do. One of them was, the white dude was bold enough to say, yeah, I understand, but the other dude was talking all kind of nonsense about his grandmama died, his mama died, and he has to be here on the anniversary of her death, and you got to do what you got to do, as if we're still in a period of chattel slavery where you don't have a mind, you just have to do what you have to do. And they were just towing the ESPN line. And that's what that was.
Right.
And the sister this morning was very strong that, let's not get into, criticizing individuals. There is a culture at ESPN that folk have to subscribe to. And so whether or not the brother goes to 4th of July barbecue and salutes the flag, it's really beside the point if you salute in the flag the other 364 days a year in your liberty, in your practice, in your lifestyle, in your relationship to your community. So, yeah, I'm going to find that piece later on. Sometimes they put clips up. To disregard and talk down to her, says Renee Florence. So, And again, this is our Money Matters edition of Social Living. And all of this that we're talking about has to do with one thing: money, getting paid, what you must do to retain that job. I mean, when I saw that dude carrying on about his mother died, and I said, no, come on, brother. You don't have to go that far to keep your job. Besides, you're good. You could get another one. Okay? And we'll be talking about a sister who just took another one and told the folk, keep your job. I'm moving on. I don't have to put up with your garbage. We'll get to her. Because that also is a huge Money Matters issue. But before we get to that, Mark Lamont Hill. You know, I had read a little of his stuff from time to time, and he of course has a program on the Black News Channel, and I want to share this piece with all. I want to share this piece.
Now, I generally like him. I think he's usually on point. So I want to see what's going on.
Well, let's see what you think of him on this piece, because I used to generally like him too. Now I have a whole bunch of questions about him based on these two pieces that I'm not sure if I'll share both based on time. But here is, oops, now I hope this works. Okay, all right, yes, I think it will work. Here is Mark Lamont Hill talking to some folk who are who are involved with, and he kind of misrepresented them too, but putting out a cheat sheet talking about, but let's check it out. Let's see if we get it to play. For some reason it seems to be
interpretation. And that's why we're very excited to have our guests on who will talk about why they believe social justice rhetoric curtails freedom of speech and diversity of thought. I have with me now two of the three authors of the cheat sheet, Drs. Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay. Thank you both for joining me. Let's just get right to it. How does social justice rhetoric curtail freedom of speech?
Well, the rhetoric around social justice itself doesn't necessarily curtail anything, but the application of that rhetoric is very chilling. It leads people to believe that they're going to be accused of participating in, supporting, or being complicit in racism, sexism, misogyny, etc., for voicing views that differ from the views of the people who forward what is known as critical social justice specifically, which is just one of many approaches to social justice in the understanding of making things more fair and less discriminatory and prejudiced in society.
Can you give me an example of that, of something that curbs freedom of speech?
Yeah, sure. Like, for example, we're not allowed to call the thing we plug into our computer anymore a master drive, or we're not allowed to talk about a master bedroom or a master bathroom, because it can sometimes make some people feel as though that those words are somehow connected to slavery, even though that's not the case. And so some people can then say, well, that word makes me feel uncomfortable, and then I don't want to have that at work. So you see major corporations, for example, deciding, well, we're not going to use the terms like master slave drive or master bedroom being struck down from realtor websites, for example. And if you don't know, by the way, the master bedroom term originated in a Sears catalog in 1929, which is quite a long time after slavery ended. So it wasn't actually connected to that. That turns out to be a legend and not even real. But you can see how being accused of racism is leading even significant corporations to back off from using that language. So the curtailing of the willingness to speak is certainly present within that ideology.
So let me push back against that, and Peter, I want you to jump in as well. I mean, it doesn't sound to me as if this is curbing free speech. It's simply imposing consequences on free speech, and there have always been consequences on free speech. If I, for example, continue to say a master-slave relationship with disk drives, right, which we all used to do, at least back in the day when we actually had disk drives, and make someone uneasy, they may respond differently. If I continue to sell my bedroom furniture as master bedroom furniture, and people say, well, you know, it makes us uneasy, and so we don't want to sell it here. These are market-based consequences, but people have a right to still do it. It seems to me that sometimes the right conflates two things. They take consequences and accountability and they conflate it with freedom. They act as if because people respond to their words or respond to their actions in particular ways, that they're no longer free to do it.
Okay, so there are two principles. There is the philosophical principle of free speech, and then there is the legal principle of free speech. And so you're appealing to the legal principle, which is of course upheld, except that the problem becomes that the philosophical notion of free speech, the idea that somebody's going to be able to speak without consequences is of course ridiculous. But the idea that somebody's going to be able to speak without having to risk losing their job or losing their standing in society for something that is actually fairly benign, for example, brown bag lunch. It's a completely benign thing, or a thing that nobody even seems to know has a not even really racist connotation in its past from over 100 years ago, long time no see, which is a direct translation from the Chinese. The idea that we're going to chill the way that people speak and that they can then lead to situations in which they're being mobbed on social media and losing their livelihood because they don't necessarily have free speech under their employer, that's a really concerning development in society. And it's one that we actually should be taking seriously, especially since we're having extremism stand downs, for example, in the US military, and we're seeing this kind of stuff taught in schools, which is being done by the state.
And one of the, if I may, Mark, piggyback off of that.
Please.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the reasons that we made this, and I genuinely thank you for reaching out to us, is to make ease of translation. And so the first author, I wish he could be here with us tonight, is Bruce Gilley. And a very quick correction from the beginning of the segment. I am not a member of the Oregon Association of Scholars, neither is Dr. Lindsay, it's just Dr. Gilley. One of the reasons that we made this cheat sheet was for policymakers, so when they heard a certain term, they could translate it into another term in their head so they could understand what people are actually saying, given that the meanings of these words have changed significantly.
So, and again, I have a couple of pushbacks here. The first one to the latter point, or the former point rather, which is, you know, again, there have always been consequences to behavior. People have always lost their jobs for things that they've said. The difference is now in the 21st century, there's a movement to say, look, things that can get you fired aren't just things that harm certain groups of people, but things that may do harm to other groups of people. Now suddenly race is in the conversation. Trans folk are in the conversation. Women are in the conversation. Issues around ability status are in the conversation.
The word folk makes me uncomfortable. The word folk comes from the Herderian nationalism. The word folk that you just used makes me uncomfortable.
Oh, the word folk, I'm sorry.
Herder. Yeah, that comes from Herder, which is a German nationalist. He used it spelled with a V, but it's pronounced folk, right? And he had a strong German nationalist streak. And he his ideology about nationalism and folkish ideology led to some pretty bad things in the early 20th century. And I'm kind of uncomfortable with you using that word. So should your speech now be curtailed because I'm uncomfortable with the word folk?
Yeah.
In this context.
Jim, if you don't mind me calling you.
It should?
Jim, if you don't mind me calling you Jim, I would say I receive that. I own that. Mm-hmm. I deeply apologize for it. If there's a way that I can restore, engage in a restorative act to make you feel better about it, I would happily do so.
I don't need a restorative act. I'm just telling you that you should know the history of the word that you're using.
I agree. I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying I should. And if there's something I can do to make sure that other people know it, I'm happy to do that as well. I think that is exactly what we should do when our words do harm.
Not folkish, ISH, but folkish. The German folkish. Do you know where the ideology went in Germany? Do you know where that led to?
Right. So again, the example that you're getting, just so that we don't get too far down this rabbit hole, I'm saying, with what you're saying, I'm saying this is exactly what I would argue should happen. You should point something out. I should be able to respond to it. And even though you're doing it somewhat tongue in cheek, potentially, but I'll presume that you're doing this in good faith. I would say I would happily change my speech and model it for other people. And that's the problem, is that somehow when the left does that toward the right or toward white people around race or toward men around gender, we often don't want to do that. And that's where it gets very, 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 very troublesome for me. But the second issue that I have here, and we can talk about it, I'm going to hold you guys over because I'd love to finish this conversation, is that some of the ways that you all are representing how social justice rhetoric is being used, I think is inaccurate. There's ways that you all are framing this that are almost caricatures of what people are actually saying in progressive circles.
Okay. that's where I lost Mark Lamont Hill because his acquiescence made absolutely no sense to me. What are your thoughts, Saber? And folk in the chat room, I'd love to hear from y'all about this because it you know, what are your thoughts? I'm not hearing you say, but something's.
Yeah, it was me. I was on mute. That did sort of, I thought it was unnecessary. I thought that he should have explained how that word has been adopted by his community and what we mean by it. And it has nothing to do with, what you mean by it. Even the history of what we, and he just explained to him, I didn't mean to offend you, but this is how I use the word, and you have to accept that. That's the position I would have taken. Not so much as, saying, yes, and I should. No, because that's the case, then you won't even have any words to use because you can always find somebody that will be offended by a particular word. It's just a question of you defining the word, how you mean it, and continuing to express yourself. That was nonsense to me.
Absolutely not. Am I supposed to stop talking about folk music or folklore or anything to do with folk because of a peculiar history that he has around that word folk? And I couldn't believe Mark Lamont Hill simply acquiesced and, oh, I own it and I should what? This is the kind of hegemony that is problematic, that you simply yield to some nonsense that, well, first of all, I don't know any college that is going to stop offering master's degree because of some master-slave conversation. The word master doesn't have that exclusive connotation, master-slave. What kind of nonsense was that just went down there?
The only way that the master word becomes a problem is in the context of when you're talking about the disk drives.
When you connect it to slave.
That's the problem, right? But if you're talking about it just in general, it doesn't come into play. I mean,
and that's the exact same thing about the word folk. If you, like I said, folk music, folklore, all of these folk stuff now goes out the window because of that some history that he's familiar with. That ain't got nothing to do with me.
I wouldn't accept that.
I couldn't believe. I lost a lot of respect for Mark Lamont Hill as a thinker, as a representative of my community. Right in that moment, I just lost it with him because, that don't even make any sense to me. That he just accepted. Oh, I embraced it. I own that. Own what?
I wouldn't have. I thought you should have just said to him, "Notice is how I use the word. This is what it means." And continue to talk.
Words have context. The word is not an absolute anything. Words have context. You can't say because the word is this in this context, then you condemn it for all times.
That's connotations and denotations, So I don't know what's up with that.
I like I said, I lost it right there because I don't think that any thinking person hosting a conversation about what that conversation was about, because basically they are pushing back on social justice rhetoric and imposing their own social justice rhetoric into the conversation and saying, but just be mindful of my social justice rhetoric because that word folk means something to me, but the word that means something to you, you need to let go of that. What is that? I can't believe that Mark Lamont Hill simply acquiesced to that nonsense.
Not only that, I mean, in a larger sense, if they're using these terms to correct or to attack the social justice movement, that's a problem in and of itself because in many ways, this stuff is just going to be a mask. It could be a mask for white supremacy.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't even, you should just reject that on principle.
That's what I'm saying, because all he's doing is superimposing his social justice, his version of social justice rhetoric on the conversation and saying, you need to adhere to mine and let go of yours. And Mark Lamont said, yeah, I'm with that, boss. I couldn't believe it happened. I could not believe that it happened. To disregard and talk down to her, says Renee. And, oh, I'm way back. She says, I couldn't talk to the guy in the blue suit. He looks like he's going to cry. I can't deal with weak men. And it's interesting you said that, Renee, because the very conversation that was being made was just a demonstration of weak men. He did look like he wanted to cry, and he did look like, well, this was just, he was pained by the word folk, and he wanted to cry. And what was that about? For you people are y'all, which one? Exactly. We have language. He has language that has significance, cultural significance to him, and so do we. And so it's okay for him to have his, but we shouldn't have ours. And the whole issue of, your friend Kafra would always talk about his master to me. And I would always say to him, brethren, what's up with this master business? Now, of course, within the martial arts.
By the way, he's my master as well. He's our master.
See what I'm saying? Within the martial arts community, that has that meaning to you. I'm not in that community, but hey, every time I'm talking about his master, I think he must be a slave talking about his master.
When I call him Master Butler, I say it with great pride.
You said with great pride.
Great pride. Because you see, the relationship that we have with him is just that he's the one that really took us to this level where our sense of being a man is where it's at. So it had nothing to do with slavery. So
absolutely.
Like he made us men in a spiritual sense.
Absolutely. And I had to own that, as Mark Lamont Hill said, but I own it within that context. Now, and like I said, words have meaning within a context, but every time Kafra would talk about his master, I'm saying, brethren, what's with you on this master business? Are you a slave or what? Talking about you.
I call him Master Butler. Yeah, I don't hesitate. I don't stutter.
And you don't think about slavery at all, because the context is
the totally opposite effect.
Exactly.
Read me in a lot of ways.
Exactly. So for Mark Lamont Hill to simply yield without even questioning and just give up the word folk, which is a word that is dear to some in our community.
I'll also tell you why that affected me especially.
Say that again?
I'll tell you why his interaction affected me especially. It's because folk is one of my words.
That's what I'm saying.
I use it a lot,
That's what I'm saying. For this community, folk is a treasured word.
Yeah, those are my folks, my people.
Yeah.
Very endearing sense of the word, not in some kind of classist, racist kind of sense.
And for him to want to impose a single meaning on the word based on his culture and his experience is absolute racism and supremacy. That's what that is. It was straight up white supremacy that was being expressed. And Mark Lamont Hill says, okay, I yield to that. That, it just...
That was a bit of a cop-out.
It was very disturbing. It's beyond a cop-out. It was very disturbing. And then I saw him in this other situation that made me say, oh, maybe that kind of strength he only has in certain circumstances. You will see what I mean.
Welcome back to Black News Tonight. We are here talking once again about the case of Bill Cosby. As you know, he was released to most people's surprise yesterday, walking out of a Pennsylvania state prison. because of a very interesting development in his case. And yesterday, many celebrities chimed in on social media. One of TV's most well-known judges, Judge Joe Brown, was one of those people who called out the way that mainstream media had been covering the story. Hours ago, he tweeted, and to be clear, much of this was in response to something I wrote, but he said, anyone who was knowledgeable of American law would have expected and predicted the outcome of the Cosby appeal. Mainstream media in Hollywood incite public disorder by lying to the people about the law and encouraging mob rule. Hollywood reacts to Bill Cosby release with shock. Here to discuss his recent comments, joining me now is Judge Joe Brown. Judge, thank you for joining me. Why do you say that mainstream media encourages mob rule?
I've talked to 43 lawyers around the country, 17 judges, and I haven't found one that was shocked by the verdict. Most saw the same thing that I did from day one. This never should have gone to trial. It's a travesty. It's a violation of due process and American law. It is part of this mess that mainstream media is trying to feed into the heads of the citizenry and poison them by saying that their emotions and their feelings are supposed to have paramountcy over what happens within the law. That's not the way it goes. I get people who never even took what they should have gotten in the 4th and 5th grade get to talking about how somebody going to disprove what these women accused Dr. Cosby of. And the truth of the matter is you don't have to. They have to prove that what they claim is true, not the other way around. That's American law. I see too much of this show up on the courthouse, voice your opinion, and get the courts to yield to what you believe. That's not the way the law works. That's called mob rule, mob justice. And if you want a more egregious exemplar, take what happened to Emmett Till and every other black man that's been lynched in the history of this country because somebody got emotional and decided to suborn the law, go around it, and do what their emotions drove them to do. So that is the way things ought to be. Law separates us from the animals, and we can't have this disregard of the law. I want to commend this Howard Dean for being forthright enough to speak out on what the reality is, and I would suggest that they need to strengthen the breadth requirements at Howard University so I don't see such ignorance coming out of this profoundly historic black university. My father went there way back in the 40s.
Well, Judge, there's two things going on at once, though, Judge.
That I have heard come out of that place lately. And if anybody
so, Judge, I think there's two things happening at once.
Justice, they ought to.
So, Judge, I think there's two things happening at once here. And I think, on the one hand, many of us are legitimately aware, and myself included, that the criminal legal system doesn't give equal outcomes to everybody, that black folk catch the worst end of this, that black men, when it comes to incarceration, get the absolute worst end of this. And the Bill Cosby case is an example of a prosecutor who was dishonest. Bill Cosby, absolutely, if he's told that you won't be prosecuted for giving this deposition, and then he gets prosecuted, that is a violation of his rights, and that is a violation of due process.
Of course it is.
On the other hand,
due process.
But on the right, but hold on, let me finish this point, Judge.
On going forward should be disciplined.
So there's that, but then there's the other question that people. So then there's this other question that people, though, have, Judge, which is a legal question. Which is not a legal question. I think those two things, to some extent, are getting mixed up. And the non-legal question is about whether or not Bill Cosby actually did harm. Legally, you can say he's not guilty because the not guilty stands.
He didn't do anything. American law, there is an absolute presumption of innocence until you are proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, using due process of law. If there was no due process of law, that presumption of innocence does not remove itself, and there is no valid conviction. If there is no valid conviction, that presumption of innocence stands as a rock for the defendant. It is to keep the government from acting in a dishonest fashion and using its powers for persecution. So Dr. Cosby
so I think we're on the same page with that.
Was not found guilty through due process. He hasn't done anything. So under American law, The accusations are just that. They carry no weight other than accusations, and they must be proven using due process beyond a reasonable doubt. If they have not been, then they are essentially worthless, just so much talk. That's
so I think we're on the same page. So I think we're on the same page with regard to the law. I think part of the challenge, and I sent out a tweet last night that you responded to. I'm going to pull it up. It says, I said, Bill Cosby is not innocent. He has not been exonerated. His release means that Cosby, a sexual predator, was incarcerated within a criminal legal system that has as little regard for its own rules and procedures as does Cosby for his victims. And you responded, you said,
he hasn't had any. Law is a baseless accusation. It has no weight.
No, so under the law, I think we're on the same page again. But part of the problem
is in the 4th and 5th grade, not law school. American law means when somebody makes an accusation, that's all it is. It has no weight. If there's probable cause, you have somebody answer the complaint. But if you cannot find someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, they have done nothing. They walk out of there with their presumption of innocence intact. How clear can that be? There is nothing to answer.
I think that
he had a right to remain silent.
I think that part is clear. No, I think that part is clear, Judge. Let me move the conversation forward.
The burden of proving his guilt. It did not. So he stands.
Right. So I guess Right. So what I want to do is just move the conversation up a little bit. I think you and I agree that legally he's not guilty, that legally he doesn't have any burden of proof. The state does, and it hasn't met that. Legally, his rights were violated. We're on the same page about that. I'm saying the legal question to me is rock solid. But I think what was happening yesterday was people were conflating those two things. They were acting as if because the state didn't meet its burden and because he was released based on the fact that he didn't get due process, or his due process rights were violated, that was somehow proof of the belief that many people had that Cosby was actually not just legally not guilty, but actually didn't do anything at the moral and ethical level. And hold on one second. I just want to place.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, no, hold on. Let me place the question to you. So I guess what I'm saying is, can we hold space for two ideas at the same time? Can someone, under the eyes of the law, be completely not guilty, and at the same time, can we have a public conversation? Because I know you talk about culture, you talk about our community, you talk about values. Can we also talk about the fact that someone can be doing great harm and even be a predator at the same time that legally they're all the things you just said?
No. Because the law presumes them innocent until you prove them guilty. It is a specious thing. That's part of this new paradigm where everybody gets a trophy, a participation ribbon. Nobody's feelings get hurt. Freedom of speech gets restricted if somebody feels uncomfortable or undelighted by what is being said. That's not our reality.
So let me ask you a question. When George Zimmerman killed Trayvon Martin and the jury found him not guilty, do you feel that the black community should not have continued to express outrage and call George Zimmerman a killer because under the law he was innocent?
They should express outrage with themselves for lacking such political influence in the selection of the district attorney or in the even weight assigned to them. See, the rules are the same. But from my perspective, I think of all the black folk that have called me over the last 35 of jury service, all of the black folk that voted a handout where you've got a racist idiot on that handout for judge and they don't even pay attention to who's on the ballot. I think of all of the black folk who don't go out and vote for sheriff or effectively for mayor or for the district attorney and complain about it. See, when you have an opportunity to do something about it, do it. And see, most of the people that are off in the penitentiaries are not in there for playing Robin Hood. They rob from their neighbors, burglarize their neighbors, kill their neighbors, rape their neighbors, sold poison to their neighbors. And the other thing is, it's not guns. It's not any excuse. It's we have got a lack of manhood and masculinity in our neighborhoods. See, masculinity is the imposition of a set of behavioral standards on a boy. So when the boy grows into a man, He has some things he has to do that he cannot get away with, that he is compelled to look to, making where he lives a better, safer, more secure place filled with economic prosperity, sense of purpose, morality, and ethics. He is a man of public peace, dignity, and order, who is a man of peace, who can be a brave and courageous man when necessary. See, we have to start
Judge,
taking
let me
our
pause you for a
neighborhoods
minute.
back.
We're going to take a Judge. I want to hear
Okay.
more about that, Judge. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to take a quick break and bring you right back. I'm going to push you on some of those things as well. Stay with me.
We're going to take a break here also and come right back to the previous conversation, because the two things really dovetail to each other. Sebedimani, your thoughts?
I see. I understand exactly what Lamont Hill is saying, but apparently he's not getting his point across because the judge is just running his line.
So what do you understand Mark Hill to be saying?
Mark Hill is saying that Mark Hill is almost saying, he's really saying Bill Cosby is out because of a technicality, and that in fact Bill Cosby, when he made the statement to the district attorney and he was assured that it wouldn't be used against him, he basically said that yes, he had used quaaludes to bed women. So Cosby said that, but it wasn't supposed to be used against him. So my Hill is saying that, well, if he said he did that, well, then he's guilty. And the fact that the district attorney then revealed it, yes, that's the legal technicality, but he admitted to it. And Judge Joe Brown is saying, yes, but because that principle of the legal system was violated, then all that other stuff doesn't count. That's what's going on.
And are you saying that the principle is a technicality?
No, what I'm saying is
Well, that's exactly what you're saying, because Joe Brown is saying that the presumption, the principle of the presumption of innocence is the bedrock of American jurisprudence.
correct.
Now, for Mark Hill to push back on that, when he didn't push back on folk, which is so nebulous and amorphous and is the bedrock of nothing, but the presumption of innocence is the bedrock of American jurisprudence, he had nothing to push back on. He just has to accept that. So the only difference I could see here is he couldn't push back on the white dude like he can push back on the black dude, because the stuff he's pushing back on the black dude is not even something you can push back on. It's not even something that you can push back on if you're talking, because his opinion and your opinion about what Cosby said is all beside the point. And that's the point the judge was making. It's beside the point in the court of law. So my real problem with the whole Cosby thing is that we get into this conversation about Cosby's guilt or innocence while the crooked jurist who did the switcheroo is not even being held to account for what he did that sold Cosby up the river. The system doesn't even deal with the problem of the district attorney who would later be representing Donald Trump in his impeachment. These crooked lawyers who messed up the system, and the conversation didn't, whether in that conversation or elsewhere, has hardly dealt with the issue of the complete violation of the system of jurisprudence, which is why black men get sent up the river so easily because of the double standards in the system. And none of that came up in this conversation, well, except, the judge was trying to be very clear that a principle is a principle. And this other argument around the principle, if the principle is the basis for the judgment, then you can't make the judgment in violation of the principle because someone violated the principle. It is really circular reasoning that Mark Hill was engaging in, and that circular reasoning, he didn't even put up any kind of reasoning with the other dude, and I can only conclude that he only got that kind of strength for black folk. He ain't putting up no pushback on white folk. Oh yes, boss, I own that. I accept that. What is that? I got so little respect for this dude now, you won't believe it.
I've seen him push back against white folks, for sure.
Say that again?
I've seen him push back against white folks, for sure.
Well, that's fine. I saw him suck up to this white folk, and that's disturbing.
I thought it was a cop out.
Especially on a black news channel. He might as well be on ESPN. You know, you can't be anchoring a black news channel with that kind of the judge talked about what makes the difference between a man and a boy. Mark Hill has shown himself to be a boy. He's not grown up. He's not grown up. I'm sorry. I cannot accept him as a grown man because he ain't behaving like one. He is not behaving like one. Would folk in the chat room want to add anything? Everett says, Uncle Tom, anyone? Go ahead.
Well, you know, see what that said. That's a problem that I have with the legal system, because I remember when I was younger, my father wanted my older brother and myself to study law, right? And when I found out, you know, what happens in the legal system, you know, what it's based on, how it operates, I didn't want to be a lawyer because I felt like it just wasn't about justice at all. And so I think the angle that the Mark Hill is saying is just that, yes, we understand all that and that it's accurate. But he still wanted to get to the point that, but the guy said he did it. See, and that's what he's approaching it from.
Then he should have said what you said. He should have challenged the legal system, because the other dude was simply standing on the principle of the legal system. Now, if he has issue with the legal system, then he should say that.
Right.
But he didn't. He tried to say, yes, but. Well, it can't be yes, but. It either is you is or is you ain't. And if you agree with the legal system and you're not questioning it, and the dude is saying, but the bedrock of the system is presumption of innocence, then maybe he needs to challenge that presumption of innocence that is in and he is saying, Mark is saying, there is a legal conversation, but there's another conversation. Well, when you're talking about the outcome in court, there's only one conversation, the legal system. It can be, well, yes, the legal system, but the only system there can be in jurisprudence is the legal system. So this yes, but is ridiculous nonsense. It's absolute nonsense to be saying yes, but. If you think the legal system, and I call it the criminal justice system because it is quite criminal when you get right down to it, it is a criminal justice system. Now, if you want to impugn the system, then go ahead and do that. But don't come with this yes, but. It either is or it isn't. You can't be yes, butting about something because it is the same yes, but that get us sold up the river time and time again. Time and time again. And in the chat room, Renee says, you saying he needs to grow up here? I respond and I say, yes, sis. And Everett says, he needs more than a peer. Aren't women strong? Do they have a peer? No. This whole conversation has gone a whole other place, as if a peer denotes strength and the absence of a peer denotes weakness, and that's a whole nother conversation. But save the money. So you think that what about that conversation between the judge and the
I understand what the
journalist.
judge is saying, and I also see the point that Lamont Hill is trying to make. But again, the judge is saying that well, the point you're making is kind of irrelevant because this was violated from the beginning, and that's what's going on. And Lamont Hill doesn't want to accept that. He wants to take some kind of moralistic position or position that he thinks is so he's taking a different position. It's not a legal position he's taking, but he pretty much said that.
Meanwhile, the culprit gets off scot-free because the culprit in all of this is the person who made promises that he either shouldn't have made or should have kept.
Well, what happens is the first district attorney made those promises to Cosby, but then a second district attorney took it over, and the second district attorney felt that he didn't have to respect the agreement that Cosby made with the first district attorney. That's what happened.
And that is disrespecting the system. That's disrespecting the court. As an officer of the court, he's disrespecting the court. Look, right now, America is pulling troops out of what's that place where they've been fighting for 20 years? Afghanistan. Now, it is the previous president who committed America to pulling troops out of Afghanistan. The new president comes along and feels compelled, even though he might also agree with it, but feels compelled to honor this obligation. The judge, it seems to me, or the district attorney, it seems to me, should not have discretion about honoring a commitment of the court. This is not his personal fiefdom. This is an obligation that the court, the system of jurisprudence, has made, and he has an obligation to honor it. And so,
lawyer-client privilege. It's a very simple concept in law.
Say that again.
You know, in other words, when a client tells you stuff, right, you as a lawyer have to protect that right. It's, attorney-client privilege. The district attorney's not, he's a lawyer. So so the second district attorney was supposed to support attorney-client privilege.
Absolutely. And I'm saying that the real culprit in this is that attorney, that district attorney who disrespected the court and just put his ego and his individualism ahead of the system. And so a judge is saying, but you can't have a system if you don't have a system. You have to work with the system. And so, but nobody is talking about what lawyers get away with. And that's the real issue here. And that's the real issue I'm seeing why we get sent up the river. Because lawyers flip-flop and go back and forth and do as they please. It's like Mitch McConnell deciding to deny Merrick Garland his seat on the Supreme Court. And not only nothing is done to correct that situation, but he's again threatening to do the same thing again if the opportunity presents itself. These folk have no respect for and I guess in this case, he's free to do it because there is nothing that says he can't do it. And the Senate and the Congress, and nobody puts anything in place that says, for instance,
but he's not in a position of power to do it right now.
I'm saying that the Democratic who control the Senate are in the position to put in place a rule that would make sure that never happens again. That's what I'm saying. And they do nothing because they all want to have that freedom to go back and forth and slip back and forth as they please. And the judge is saying, but you can't have a system that operates in that loose, laissez-faire kind of way. And I have to agree with him. If the folk in Congress were serious, instead of talking about, oh, we're going to expand the Supreme Court, make it 11, make it 13, as if that would end anything. you know, so Mitch McConnell can have 9 people on the Supreme Court instead of 7. You know, the issue is not the number of people. The issue is having a principled process by which people get on the Supreme Court. And in the case of Bill Cosby, the issue is having a process that holds jurists accountable. And right now, jurists are not held accountable. They do as they please. They, one make a promise, the other come and disregard it. Somebody get sent to prison, and it's okay because they're lawyers. They can do as they please. No, no, it can't be. That cannot be how justice is. So the whole issue of whether Cosby is guilty or innocent is not even the issue. The issue is an accountable system for making that determination. We don't have that. We don't have an accountable system when one judge can promise and the other judge can disregard the promise, and nobody says anything. Somebody goes to jail. Somebody gets exonerated, and well, we have all of this conversation in the community, but at the same time, the person who messed up, and I guess both of them messed up, the one who made the promise in the first place and the one who didn't, respect the promise in the second place, they just do as they please. And it's okay. That's what is called the system of jurisprudence. No, it's a criminal justice system because they're all criminal up there. That's what I say. It is truly a criminal justice system. I would put very in front of it, a very criminal justice system. That's what we're dealing with. And so, if Mark Lamont Hill wants to pursue Cosby's guilt or innocence, then he probably needs to team up with a judge and advocate for putting in place a justice system that is not criminal. Because right now, it's a very criminal justice system as far as I can see. Your thoughts, brother?
No, I understand. And in fact, that is exactly why so many black folks have been put in jail because of the district attorneys and them manipulating the law the way they saw fit. So all types of technicalities.
Absolutely. We saw the whole trial over the murder of George Floyd, and I guess nobody believed that a cop could be found guilty and sent to prison for killing a black man. Well, the what's his name? The Attorney General, former civil rights attorney, former congressman, pulled a very dynamic team together that saw the system work. But how often does that happen? How often does you get cops to testify against cops and all of what took place in that trial? Keith Ellison, yes. How often do we see that happen in this criminal justice system? It is, and Keith Ellison was passed over by Barack Obama to be the head of the Democratic Party, the DNC. It's probably a good thing because then he would not have gone on to become.
They voted on it. It came down to him and Perez.
And Perez got it. And that probably was a good thing as far as the George Floyd case is concerned. Not to say that nobody else could have done what happened there, but fact of the matter is it was Keith Ellison that did what happened there, that demonstrated that the criminal justice system can work if applied as it's supposed to be. How often that happens is a whole nother story.
Keith Ellison is the first African American to represent the government from Minnesota. Man. So it doesn't have a lot of black folks. It's a very backwards place.
Well, today is the anniversary of the killing of Castile out in Minnesota. So yeah, that just tells you what that place is and has been. Whigamores, says Renee Florence. Do you know what that means, Saber?
Rigor mortis?
No, Whigamores. Wiggamores.
Nah, I know what wiggers are. I don't know what rigor mortis are.
I don't know that word either, Renee. You're going to have to, you got some splaining to do, sis. To help us understand what you're talking about in the chat room about Whigamores. Okay, well, we're going to move along and get to the other piece that I said. I said we would talk about Cosby, and we did. But from a money matters standpoint, by the way, perhaps the only reason all of this is happening, all of this conversation is happening, is because Cosby is a wealthy man. If he were not a wealthy man, would all of this conversation be going on? I don't think so. What do you think, Saber?
I agree. His money was able to hire the right lawyers to pursue all the technicalities. If he didn't have the money, then no one would be taking his case. Nobody's doing pro bono work. And so the fact that he's wealthy, he was able to use the system to, I mean, in this legal system, you can find, there are enough loopholes that if you can hire the right person, they'll keep looking, and keep looking.
We saw what happened to Rodney King, and I guess the right legal system was not in place there, was it? I don't think it was. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break and come back and shift gears and get to Washington, D.C., because that's where we'll be ending up on this next story, isn't it?
This is Lucian as a messenger, inviting you to support CPR, the coalition to preserve reggae and keep roots reggae music alive. CPR is a non-profit organization. Come and be a part of this. It's a wonderful celebration. Give praise to Rastafari. For more information,
you go in the supermarket and you're looking at your fruits and vegetables, and you'll see this code on most of your fruits and vegetables. That's called the PLU code. And this code is not only there just to help the cashier know what to ring up, but it's there to kind of tell you exactly where your fruit or vegetable has come from. And so I want to teach you now so you can know when you go into the stores to always look for the code. If it's a 5-digit code and it begins with the number 9, then that means it is organic. If you see a fruit or vegetable and it's a 4-digit code that begins with a 3 or a 4, that means that it is possibly conventionally produced. And if you see a fruit or vegetable that begins with the number 8, a 4-digit code that begins with the number 8, it is genetically modified.
This is one a real epidemic. Everybody get hooked on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Well, this is Tasha T, and right now the world is in a turmoil. So do remember to take the necessary precautions. Wash your hands properly before touching anything or anyone. So please be responsible. Tasha T said that. One love.
So you guys know the past few weeks I've been using this part of the show to highlight something egregious. But the University of North Carolina's decision to deny tenure to the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones was just so ridiculously absurd, I had to pass the mic and let my brilliant friend, Ta-Nehisi Coates, break it down.
Much coverage has attended the efforts in some 40 states to change voting laws so as to favor Donald Trump and his supporters. But the assault on democracy goes beyond the ballot box. Last year, President Trump issued an executive order creating the 1776 Commission, which he offered up as a rebuke to the 1619 Project. Helmed by one of the most decorated journalists of her generation, Nicole Hannah-Jones, The 1619 Project sought to expose the American experiment's origins in the laboratory of slavery. Trump's rebuke was not a private effort, but one that enjoyed the sponsorship of the state. Perhaps because a certain class of pundits still fails to regard Trump's bluster seriously, the response to this assault on a free press was muted. But the import of Trump's actions is clear. Across the country, a wave of bills have sought to ban the 1619 Project, critical race theory, and other, quote, divisive concepts, unquote, from the public sphere. This assault comes at a moment when many Americans are realizing that they do not live in the country they were raised to believe in. The January 6th attack on the Capitol, the deployment of secret police to Portland, and the constant B-roll of Black people beaten, shot, and tased by law enforcement has shocked the conscience of those who sincerely once thought themselves to have been born into the world's oldest democracy. The shock, along with the work of countless writers, historians, journalists, sociologists, and other academics, has occasioned a broad revisiting of the American story. It is now clear that the creation of America required not only the theft of labor and land, but a national myth which remade pirates into patriots. This long-held national myth is not served by the recent reckoning. It isn't served by remembering Thomas Jefferson, for instance, as a man who ran up so much debt in his lifetime that those he enslaved had to be sold off at his death in order to settle his accounts. And yet, understanding that Jefferson's career as a slaveholder, as the bequest of a founding father, does much to explain the actions of this project. This understanding cannot be allowed to prosper, however, for white power can only retain its privilege in our political system if it can tell itself a story. This week, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, a public institution, took the unprecedented step of rescinding an offer of tenure to Hannah Jones at the behest of its board of trustees. Hannah Jones's 1619 Project has enjoyed its share of critique, which is exactly as it should be. Efforts to overturn long-standing national idea deserve debate. What they do not deserve is the censure and silencing of the state. I am not speaking of cancellation as culture, but as public policy. The present attacks on the 1619 Project and critical race theory are not being waged through Twitter, but through the offices of 19 state attorney generals, the legislatures of at least 6 states, and the headquarters of 23 senators, including the Senate Minority Leader. The scope of this attack goes beyond journalism and history. When Donald Trump used his office as president to bully the NFL into depriving Colin Kaepernick of his career, this was cancellation as policy. When the legislatures of Florida and Kentucky moved to outlaw protests and make it easier to legally kill those who persist, it is cancellation as policy. Twitter mobs are bad, but an actual mob, baited by elected officials into attempting the violent overthrow of an election, is something more. It should not surprise us that a horde, addicted to a national myth that pitched white men as the unvarnished savior of all civilization, is not primed to share the country that they've been taught that they own. It is myth which sanctifies their action. It is myth which is their sword. They attack the vote to prevent us from enacting a better world. They attack the history to prevent us from ever imagining one.
They attack the history to prevent us from ever imagining one. Comments, please, from the chat room and from Sebedemani on what Ta-Nehisi Coates just had to say about University of North Carolina rescinding the offer of tenure to the professor.
Well, I mean, it's part of the continuing attack on critical race theory.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Part of the continuing attack against critical race theory. And you'll find that, I mean, like the attack on critical race theory has now become part of the playbook for the white supremacists. You know, for some reason, to speak the truth, to teach the truth has become synonymous with being racist or dishonest, revisionist history. And so that's what's going on. I mean, these folks want to continue to teach the myths, you know, the whole George Washington being so upright and honest that he couldn't tell a lie, you know, to chop down father's cherry tree and say, yes, he did it. They want to keep this image of Thomas Jefferson alive. And, you know, the fact that, you know, his behavior nowadays would be highly questioned and questionable. He'd be a pedophile and a whole bunch of other things. So they must keep those images alive as far as they're concerned. And they see any documents that present, and not going as far as to call him, you know, Jefferson a pedophile, but just exposing, you know, these men for their flaws. The so-called Republican establishment, those folks, they reject all of that. They must keep the myth alive. It's almost like, I mean, it's like religion almost. You know, it's become a religious obsession to keep the myths of the founding fathers alive. The same way the myth of you know, Moses parting the sea has to be kept alive to maintain, you know, the foundation of Judaism, Christianity, and even Islam. So you got to cling to those myths. And the myths become historical in that sense. They no longer are seen as myths, they become historical.
And what does all of this have to do with money matters? Well, in keeping the myths alive, they're willing to violate their own rules, just like we just talked about in the court, so that the school decided to take her on until some wealthy person backing the school says, wait a minute, I don't want her on there, get rid of her. And they says, yes, boss, and went right ahead and got rid of her. In the chat room, let's see, Renee Florence says, British political part wearing wigs and black robes, basically Congress today. So they're, in other words, if I'm reading this correctly, perpetuating what is, well, not really a myth, but perpetuating the practice which they fought against to free themselves from the British. Everett says they re-offered it, but she has declined, moving on to Howard alongside Mr. Coates. We're going to get to that in a minute. And Lorna Doone says, banning critical race theory equals upholding white supremacy. And that's what it comes down to. Banning critical race theory equals upholding white supremacy. And they will break their own rules and jump through hoops and do whatever they feel they must do in order to uphold white supremacy. Well, that piece we just saw from Ta-Nehisi Coates, who, by the way, you know, a couple of years ago, Ta-Nehisi Coates bought a home not far from here, walking distance from where I am, where you are, up in Prospect Lefferts Gardens. And then the news got out that he bought this multi-million-dollar home, and he promptly sold it. And I wondered then, and wonder now, what was that about? He bought a home in a black neighborhood, and then decided he wanted to be there secretly. And once people got to know that he had bought this place, he immediately sold the place even before moving in. So who said about growing up here? You know, it's easy to get in front of the microphone and talk stuff, but coming to the hood ain't that easy. And Brother Coates just turned tail and left town. But I still love him. And going back, by the way, that conversation between Lamont Hill and the judge kind of reminded me of my conversation a few years ago with the son of the son of Marcus Garvey, Dr. Julius Garvey, who was pursuing in 2016. Yeah, that's when it happened. 2016. The whole notion of pardoning his father, and I contended that a pardon would be inappropriate because a pardon is
admission of guilt.
An admission of guilt. Absolutely. Marcus Garvey should be exonerated, not pardoned. And of course, he wasn't happy with that. But I still maintain that. And I see Yvette Clarke has just introduced something calling on Joe Biden to exonerate Garvey. So let's see what happens with that. But as was just pointed out, before we even get to her receiving the offer finally, you know, a lot of people decided that they weren't going to take it sitting down, especially the students. I was just so proud of the students, knowing that the students kind of just stood up, grew up here, as my sister in the chat room puts it, and said to the school, no, we ain't having it. We are not having it. The entire faculty had voted in favor of her. The board had voted in favor of her until this party says, no, we can't have her. And because this party is very moneyed, they acquiesced. Money Matters, y'all. This is the Money Matters edition of Social Living, and there is a method to our madness. Yes, it was all about the money, and suddenly, because of the money, and we will get to some more about the money, because she's bringing millions to Howard, because of the money, and because canceling critical race theory is upholding white supremacy, which is about the money, they decided to withdraw the offer. And the students and the faculty stood up in righteous indignation and said, no, we ain't going out like that. We ain't having it. You need to give this sister lifetime tenure. And that's the end of that. Well, it came down to a vote yesterday when she got the tenure that some of the students got. I don't know if they got locked up last week when they demonstrated, but there was a real ruckus down there at the University of North Carolina, and at the end of the day, she got the tenure. Here's some. Do I have the correct thing? Let me see. No. I hope I have the right thing. This doesn't look like the right thing, but we'll find out. Bear with me, folk. If this is not the right thing, then I apologize. But I think it is the right thing.
Hannah Jones, after weeks of controversy, she is here. We reported how University of North Carolina trustees agreed to offer tenure to journalist Nikole Hannah-Jones. After weeks of controversy, she is here with us now for her first interview since the offer was approved. It was approved last week, Wednesday, July 1st. Nikole Hannah-Jones, we welcome you to CBS this morning.
Thank you so much.
What have you decided to do? We just heard the vote was 9-4, offering you the tenure. What have you decided?
Well, I've decided to decline the offer of tenure. I will not be teaching on the faculty of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It's a very difficult decision, not a decision I wanted to make. And instead, I'm going to be the inaugural night chair in race and journalism at Howard University.
So many things to unpack there. First, let's start with you declining the offer. The vote was 9-4, clearly in your favor. There are some people that could say, you said you wouldn't take the job without being offered tenure. They offered you the tenure, and you're still saying, thanks, but no.
Absolutely.
Because?
Well, because look what it took to get tenure. So this was a position that since the 1980s came with tenure. The night chairs are designed for professional journalists who have been working in the field to come to academia. And every other chair before me, who also happened to be white, received that position with tenure.
It has never been denied. No one had ever been denied tenure before.
Exactly. And I went through the tenure process, and I received the unanimous approval of the faculty to be granted tenure. And so to be denied it and to only have that vote occur on the last possible day, at the last possible moment, after threat of legal action, after weeks of protest, after it became a national scandal, it's just not something that I want anymore.
Because there were two chances, it seems to me, they could have voted for tenure. In November, then you heard that the tenure offer was being pulled. Did anybody explain why it was being pulled?
No, Gail. To this day, neither the chancellor or the provost or anyone on the board of trustees has ever told me why my tenure was not taken up in November, why it was not taken up in January, and even the public statements about needing more information about my credentials. They voted without ever asking me or receiving any additional information than what they had in November.
Now, at one point, I believe there was an offer that you could work there, you could teach for 5 years, and then they would reconsider tenure. And it seems at one point you had accepted that offer, right?
I did.
You do that, and what changed your mind?
Well, I accepted it after going through months and months of the tenure process. This is my alma mater. I love the university. The university has given me a lot, and I wanted to give back. It was embarrassing to be the first person to be denied tenure. It was embarrassing, and I didn't want this to become a public scandal. I didn't want to drag my university, through the pages of newspapers because I was the first and the only black person in that position to be denied tenure. So I was willing to accept it.
During that time.
Never. This has not become public because of anything that I did. As you know, this is the first time I'm speaking about this at all.
Why do you suppose they didn't right away offer you tenure? What do you think the reason is?
I mean, what has been reported is that there was a great deal of political interference by conservatives who don't like the work that I've done, particularly the 1619 project, and also by the powerful donor who gave the largest donation in the 70-year history of the journalism school. So it's pretty clear that my tenure was not taken up because of political opposition, because of discriminatory views against my viewpoint, and I believe my race and my gender.
Yeah, and let's talk, should politics be part of this process?
No,
it seems to become very, very political.
Yeah, it's actually against state law for political interference to be part of the tenure process. So no, it clearly shouldn't. Every person who comes up from tenure should be judged by the quality of their work, by how they went through the tenure process. Again, it has to be made clear. I went through the official tenure process, and my peers in academia said that I was deserving of tenure. These board members are political appointees who decided that I wasn't.
And can we say you have a 20-year career with impeccable credentials? Let's talk about the 1619 project, because the New York Times did issue a clarification, not a correction. They said they have stood by you. There was a clarification. What was the clarification, and what is your response to the criticism?
Sure. So the clarification was that we added 2 words to a statement on the role of slavery in the American Revolution. The original text, right? The original text said that one of the primary reasons that colonists decided to break off from the British Empire was to preserve slavery. We added that one of the primary reasons that some of the colonists decided to break off. It was a clarification, and I think, in academia and in journalism, we should clarify if necessary. That's never been seen somehow as making a project illegitimate because you try to strengthen and clarify your argument.
You've released a 8-page statement. I encourage people to read the statement. It's 8 pages where you really take us through exactly what happened.
Okay, so there you have it. Another instance of money matters. Some big money dude got in and says, I'm a big money dude, and I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, and she ain't coming here. And they said, yes, sir, boss, she ain't coming here. Basically, is what happened. So let's be clear. All of this stuff about policy and public policy, well, when the politics get involved, and let's be clear that the politics is never devoid of money. Politics really speaks to money. And when we start putting our money where our politics is, I think we'll see some difference. But your thoughts, Saber, on what we just heard explained about what uh, the sister went through, Nicole went through with and all behind the 1619 project. I can't hear you, Saber. I think you're muted.
It's I mean, there's nothing to really say. I think that, you know, she graduated from North Carolina. She taught there, and now because of you know, this whole nonsense she went through, she decided to just go ahead to Howard. And of course, there's a part of me that says, I mean, I don't know. There's a certain prestige, I guess, not prestige, a certain pride, I guess, in teaching at the university where you know, where you came from. But she broke it down in terms of the reasons why she felt that she was, you know, overlooked or disrespected. This was the first time it ever had happened. As far as she knows, someone was denied tenure when they were in a course that was a tenure track. She said that it's because of a political position or race and her gender. And I believe that she's correct. You know, I mean, colleges we generally think of colleges as being places that are liberal. And I think colleges sort of follow the trend of the culture to a certain extent. You know, that when
say it again, colleges follow the trend of
the culture in general. You know, when there are liberal times, colleges may tend to be somewhat more liberal. In conservative times, there's pressure for colleges to be somewhat more conservative. And of course, some universities, of course, have the tradition of just being liberal. Those will never change. But then you have some that, you know, have a tradition that has a certain kind of plasticity to it. But in general, I think the more prestigious a university is, the more will tend to have a streak of conservatism within it. And again, depending on the state too. North Carolina has never been a state that's been very liberal. It's been a state that has a strong history with the Klan, a strong history of just racism in general. So North Carolina was just showing its face.
I didn't hear that last statement. Say it one more time.
North Carolina was simply showing its face.
Okay. Well, so what are the lessons that we should take away from this situation?
Well, one thing is that she maintained, you know, she's taking a certain position that she feels is principled. You know, she could have went back and took the offer, but she's saying that no, they disrespected her. The whole process was flawed. It was political, and so because of that, she's going to go someplace where she knows that she'll be accepted and can do just as great. Can do work just as great, you know, and to a community or to a population, student population that probably can do more with what she has to offer than maybe North Carolina can anyway.
Yes, indeed. And like I said, politics is all about money, isn't it? And we saw the whole, what was the name of that case that said that corporations are people. Now, it is a money matter because here is a headline. 2 iconic American writers join Howard to create a center to help educate the next generation of black journalists. 3 major foundations and an anonymous donor invest nearly $20 million to support this work. So I believe that she had something to do with that money going to Howard in the first place. I think in it. In the piece, did she just mention $15 million? So, well, let's read a little bit of this. Howard University announced today that Nicole Hannah-Jones and Howard alumnus Ta-Nehisi Coates will join the Howard University faculty. Hannah-Jones will be a tenured member of the faculty of the Cathy Hughes School of Communications, filling the newly created Knight Chair in Race and Journalism. Coates, journalist and author, will be a faculty member of the flagship College of Arts and Sciences. Hannah-Jones, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, will also found the Center for Journalism and Democracy, which will focus on training and supporting aspiring journalists in acquiring the investigative skills and historical and analytical expertise needed to cover the crisis of democracy, the crisis our democracy is facing. The center hopes to work across multiple historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, that offer journalism degrees and concentrations. Well, let's stop right there. Or wait a minute. The appointments are supported by nearly $20 million donated by Knight Foundation, which I believe gave $5 million, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, another $5 million, the Ford Foundation, another $5 million, as well as an anonymous donor to support Howard's continued education of and investment in black journalists. Okay, so what are your thoughts there now, Saber? It seems to me, while you think about it, that the story could not have a better ending. The story could not have a better ending, and I hope those folk who oppose her tenure are proud of themselves now for having aided and abetted this development at Howard University, which is where she should be in the first place.
That's what I would think. You know, I always say to myself that if I had an offer to teach at Howard versus teaching at Harvard, there's no doubt in my mind that I'm going to Howard. There's no doubt. You know, there's a certain prestige always associated with Harvard University, but I know I don't belong there.
And Marlene McKetty, who didn't go to Howard but worked there for decades, says, "Go Bison, HU, you know." Indeed, indeed, indeed. The Howard folks are feeling good. In fact, Everett says, "Is this the academic equivalent of Howard's dream team?" Well, what are your thoughts about the significance of this? First of all, the significance of the resource development aspect of it, as we say in the industry, the garnering of the funds to make it possible. Because at the end of the day, that's all that it takes to make things happen. Having the resources.
That's how the universities stay in, that's how they stay in business. You know, they have to have endowments and different monies coming from different foundations. And so it's beautiful. You know, we know that school will be in good shape for a little while.
Man, I know this young sister who is just so proud to have graduated from Howard, and she's a journalist and just doing great work, and just so I'm sure she's saying like Marlene, "Go Bison, HU," you know. But yes, I think that a big part of the story is, and let's come back to your concern about the funding, the underwriting of the Black News Channel, because this school, let's be clear, although, what was the name of the brother who headed No, that wasn't the Ford. Was it the Ford Foundation that the brother headed? Yeah, because I know he supported the anti-apartheid struggle a lot. Can't even think of his name right now. But let's be clear that the Knight Foundation, the Catherine and the MacArthur Foundation, and what was the other one? Was it the Ford Foundation?
I think you said Ford, yes.
None of them is
African.
So it's all white money that's funding this, except we don't know who the anonymous donor is. Could be Bill Cosby for all I know. But what do you say about that, Sable? And are you concerned that it's the Knight Foundation, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and the Ford Foundation, along with the support of this anonymous donor pitching in another $5 million, that is underwriting this?
In general, those structures, those donors, they do have a say to a certain extent, right? But I think that in the educational environment nowadays, in Howard in particular, I mean, first of all, Howard is not a bastion of liberalism anyway. Howard just, tries to pride itself on giving a good education. You have some excellent professors at Harvard who are very African-centered, but you have a lot of professors that are also moderate. You have a spectrum. And so in that kind of environment, I think that it can do good because you have those counterbalances within the school itself.
By the way, the vice president might have something to say about what you just said, because she credits Howard with doing a lot to shape her and make her who she is. But go ahead.
Yeah, but she has her own controversies. But here's my point, though. That
wait. The only reason people have controversies is because they're doing stuff.
Yeah.
Do nothing people have no controversies because they do nothing.
That's true too. But what I was going to say is that when it comes to the media, it's kind of different because your impact can be much more immediate, you see. And so, for example, Booker T. Washington. So there was a big thing between, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. It becomes the first. It kind of like lays the foundation for the Du Bois Garvey controversy, right? There's like this continuation. But one of the main reasons why Du Bois was so upset with
Washington
was because of money. What happened was Washington, he had all the backing of the robber barons, the money moguls, Carnegie, Rockefeller, and so therefore Booker T. Washington controlled the majority of monies that was going to black universities. It came through him, and so Washington made sure that he didn't send a lot of money to academic education schools. And this got Du Bois very, very upset. And so it was actually monies that was at the foundation ideology too, but the fact that Du Bois felt that with Washington, the position that he was in, black academic education was being stifled. He felt that was like, playing into the hands of the white supremacists. And so that's what happened. So those folks were giving money to black educational institutions that they knew would not argue for integration and wouldn't challenge white supremacy straight up. All right. And so when people give money, they have a certain information, But again, at the university, that level, you got a better chance than, let's say, you're giving money to a radio station or a television station.
Mm. Now, let's talk about the ideological difference that you mentioned between Du Bois and Washington, because yes, Washington was about Du Bois was about the talented 10th,
Yes.
and Washington was at the other end of the spectrum. Not that the folk working with their hands would be deemed any less talented, but that you should cast your bucket down where you are, is what Washington would say. And what do you say about that divergence in ideology?
Well, I mean, the reality is that you definitely you need both. You know, I think that what Washington was saying, let's build a solid economic foundation, and then from there we can then begin to pursue. We didn't have an interest, an economic interest that will require us to have the lawyers and the sociologists. So I think he just felt that one thing came before the other, because Washington secretly did funnel money to certain causes. And so because of that, you know, Dr. Clark says he was a strategic Uncle Tom. He's funneled money to voting rights in certain states. So he did some of the things he did things privately that publicly he said.
Why did Dr. Clark have to call him an Uncle Tom? What's that about?
Well, because there was a certain period in African American history where Booker T. Washington was considered Uncle Tom. So Clark, you know, Clark comes along to kind of straighten it out and, you know, set it straight.
But what about outcomes? You know, Kwame Nkrumah talked about seek ye first the political kingdom. And of course, in a former colony, that would make sense. In a domestic colony, if you want to call it that, there is no political kingdom to seek, really. And so Booker T. Washington was going straight to bypassing the political kingdom and going to the economic kingdom and seeing the economics as being or building an economic foundation as being of paramount importance to progress.
Yeah, well, it is important. I mean, the main lesson that I learned from the French Revolution is that your economics dictates and determines your politics. And whoever has the money, that's who has a say in terms of politics. And that it's not really the other way around. That's what the bourgeoisie were fighting for in the French Revolution. That's what I learned. I think that's kind of like what Marx makes as one of the foundations for his theory.
And of course, every situation is different. That's why I said in the case of Nkrumah, as a colony seeking independence, it made sense to seek the political kingdom, because without it, you wouldn't be able to deal with the economic kingdom.
But that's also what creates conditions for neocolonialism, too.
In the case, though, of Africans in America, that was not the situation, and as was seen in Black Wall Street, and as was seen in the work that Booker T. Washington did, you could go directly to the economic kingdom and then allow that to drive the political force.
I think it's possible then, because back then, to not use this word, America was like an open frontier. And so many African Americans, when they went west after the Civil War, they were able to establish their own towns from the ground up. And so for the most part, they were free from a lot of the direct racial racism, so to speak. And sometimes if they went to a place, like for example, you have this guy named Benjamin Singleton, that he was one of the first guys to say, let's go west and let's settle Kansas. So there were parts of Kansas that were all black as well. But as the whites began to encroach those areas, Benjamin Singleton decided, let's go back to Africa. So he started a Back to Africa movement. So you have this dynamics where that many black towns were settled, but the more prosperous they were, you then had encroachment by white folks as well as by the railroads, as I said before. So that was the dynamics that was going on here. So you could have that kind of situation, but again, the racism and the white supremacy, it would be just a matter of time before whites that weren't doing as well would become envious and didn't just use violence with support of governments to just displace these towns. And it's happened. I mean, you can't count the number of times it's happened. And again, Black Wall Street is one of the more known ones, but now we're finding out again that it's happened everywhere, all over. You know, history's been sort of buried, but you know, it's coming out. People were just, you know, doing research.
Underwater, so to speak.
Correct, underwater in many cases, yeah. Or on the railroad tracks, right? You know,
literally underwater.
Yes, literally. But the thing is just that that even when Nkrumah says that, if you don't have the economic situation to support you, you're going to always have those elements that will continue to sell out or willing to make deals with the devil, meaning the form of colonialism. And what began to happen in Africa, it seems like, is just that after they got rid of those first crop of truly revolutionary leaders and they overthrew them, they set up a situation where you had this new crop of leaders, not even leaders, but, you know, who just, the deal seemed like it was, okay, you can go ahead and handle this country as your personal fighter, but don't mess around with our money. Continue to allow us to get the resources out at the prices we dictate. And it seems like for a while, that's the political structure that dominate, you know, African societies. And these dictators came about.
What are you saying, therefore, about Nkrumah's position?
I'm saying that the economic piece must also be part of it. It has to be locked down. And if you do one without the other, you're still going to run into the problems of people who have the money hiring stooges to kill you and prop up a government that they're going to support. And at the same time, this guy is going to act like an individual king. So, in other words, that, and I'm not saying that Nkrumah wasn't supposed to act when he did. I'm just saying that you can see that hindsight is 20/20, and that the economic component.
I guess what, right, and I'm pretty sure Nkrumah understood the importance of the economic component.
He did.
My question to you, though, is, as a practical matter, what were his options in, you know,
well, he was in
the 1950s?
Nkrumah was in a bad situation because he's first to do it. He wants to support his Pan-Africanism, right? But at the time he did it, because he's first, you only had the Arabs of North Africa that were free, and then you had like Egypt, and I think Sudan was in the picture. And the problem was, as somebody said, that everybody that he had to deal with, these first 8 countries, I think it was, it's like 2 of them are sub-Saharan and identify themselves as being black and African, right? 4 of the countries in his OAU, his African Union, before it was actually laid out, but in the early stages, 4 of them were Arab countries that saw themselves as Africans by being in Africa, but they didn't see themselves as African people. In fact, they saw their area was more the Middle East, and then the 2 African countries, matter of fact, it was Ethiopia and Egypt, right? That one, of course, you know, the Arabs in Egypt too, but they try to, you know, act like the Coptics are there. But they saw themselves again as being African, but not being black. And then the Ethiopians saw themselves as Africans and not being black. Because, you know, they were still in this whole Hamitic thing, and they were dark-skinned white people. That was the official line. So Nkrumah was he was in a situation where he's dealing with the only other countries that were available to unite with for this Pan-Africanism. They didn't see themselves as Africans the same way he saw himself as African. And so he was in a pickle, so to speak. But he moved forward and did what he had to do.
Well, you know, the members of the Ethiopian Federation would take a lot of issue with what you just said.
They would.
Because the whole idea of the Ethiopian World Federation, which Haile Selassie initiated and headquartered here in the United States, was to unite people of African ancestry.
Right.
So clearly there was no denial, certainly on the emperor's part, about his Africanness, except that whether or not, whether,
not the African issue.
whether you call it Ethiopian or African is a whole other issue, but
not just Ethiopian, but in terms of the black identification. See, this black identification was I guess you could say it was kind of, it's a new political designation to a certain extent. Because you see in Ethiopia, and again, we all know that Ethiopia is a land of the black-faced people. We've known it for years. Right? That's what we all understand. But with colonialism coming and the politics, right now, in some of those East African countries, particularly like Eritrea and Somalia and even parts of Ethiopia, you have this color prejudice nonsense that's sticking its head out, and it gets beyond that. You have people in Ethiopia, in some places, that are teaching West Africans, calling them people with hard hair. You got all kind of foolishness going on. You got them talking about.
Wait. You don't have to go to Ethiopia for that. You find it in Bed-Stuy.
What you talking about? But you don't. But of course you do here. But here we can always understand it because we always say that, oh, that's because of slavery and blah 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 blah.
And that's ridiculous because people in Africa were equally impacted by slavery and da 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 da. So to excuse yourself because of slavery, as if it didn't impact people on the continent, is ridiculous.
Slavery, because of what people would say is that they didn't go through slavery.
Imperialism didn't stop at the shore.
They went to colonialism, right. But I'm saying that this is the reality, right? You don't expect, and a person who's looking to Ethiopia and has a certain idealization of it, they don't want to hear that kind of talk. It throws them off, It's like, what's going on here?
Getting back to Nkrumah though, this is Money Matters, and seeking first the political kingdom really, in my understanding, spoke to the whole independence and the notion of becoming an independent nation.
Correct.
What were the options? It seems to me that he didn't have to say it because it was the only option available, because certainly there was no economic kingdom to pursue, especially in a colonial state, because even as an independent state, they're not allowing you to allowing your development in your interest, certainly not permitting you or allowing you or facilitating the economic wherewithal, even with your resources.
Right. So I think that, Nkrumah, as well as a few of those other leaders, so for example, Patrice Lumumba, Nkrumah, what's the guy's name from Kenya?
Kenyatta.
Kenyatta, right? All those guys were at, let me get my picture right, my image right. All those guys were at.
Could you stay in the camera, please?
Yeah, I'm trying to get right now. It seems like I'm doing it wrong.
It's okay. Stay where you are. I'll do it on my.
No. I got it. So what happens is, so those guys were at the 5th Pan-African Congress, right? And this is very important. At the fifth Pan-African Congress was actually controlled by George Padmore, right? He's the engineer behind the 5th Pan-African Congress, right? And his plan was to...
By the way, could you tell us where Padmore was from?
Padmore is from Trinidad.
All right, go Trini.
Trinidadian. He's one of he's one of the Trinidadian nationalists.
Go Trini. Go Caribbean.
Like, Trinidadian has a very unique history of producing Pan-Africans. I still don't know why. I asked a woman from Trinidad, why was that? She says, well, because the Trinidadians had to deal with those doggone Indians. So that created a certain kind of like, weirdness. That was her position. But for whatever reason, Trinidad has this history of Pan-Africanism. And George Padmore, and by the way, C.L.R. James, who's a great, scholar, also from Trinidad, he believes that he pushed George Padmore in this. He says there's three great African men from Trinidad who have. And by the way, let me just say this real quick. I get upset when George Padmore. I get upset when well, he does. Okay, let me just finish my statement. So, what's his name? C.L.R. James, who's considered, an intellectual giant and a Pan-Africanist, that he says that George Padmore clearly does not get the credit he deserves. And he speaks of George Padmore in the same breath and sentence that he speaks of Marcus Garvey and Toussaint Louverture. And that's the big thing. But this is my point, though. But George Padmore is the one that really engineered the plan for the Africans to go back to Africa and take over their governments. Initially, the idea was that, so him and C.L.R. James and a lot of these guys, they were all Marxists, right? And C.L.R. James, he kind of became a Trotskyite, and George Padmore was a Stalinist who eventually just was out there. And eventually he morphed his Marxism into Pan-Africanism. So for George Padmore, Pan-Africanism was inseparable from a form of communism, right? And so George Padmore is Kwame Nkrumah's mentor. You see how it works? So Kwame Nkrumah goes back to Ghana, and George Padmore goes back there with him. And so they begin to strategize that, okay, forget about, and initially the idea was that they were going to go back and be going to use guns, okay? But somehow they changed the plan and they decided to use Gandhi's approach. They decided to use civil disobedience. And so they go back and they jump right on this, using civil disobedience to bring down the British. At the same time, all along, Kwame Nkrumah's idea was to set up a communist government. So for him, he wouldn't necessarily be concerned about the economics in the traditional sense because he already knows he wants to nationalize stuff and create Pan-Africanism, which would be inseparable from communism as the way George Padmore and them had laid it out. So each of these guys went back to their country with actually a plan that George Padmore had engineered. So that's why his Pan-Africanism and his in other words, his politics was economics because Nkrumah didn't separate his Pan-Africanism from economics. So that's what's going on. So that's what makes it possible.
Yeah, basically what he's articulating is a strategic plan.
Yes.
And that strategic plan says, get control and then do what you got to do. Basically is what.
Always have a communist style from the very beginning. So he wasn't interested in developing the capitalism that was already there or using it as a method per se, because he already conceptualized this as being a communist kind of situation.
Seek ye first the political kingdom, and I absolutely agree with him in that situation, and I absolutely agree with Booker T. Washington in this situation, and in part for very personal and selfish reasons. I attended the Jamaica School of Agriculture, and he didn't just keep it to himself. The School of Agriculture in Jamaica, students from that school were assured of admission into Tuskegee. So when I came here and considered studying veterinary medicine, I was accepted in Tuskegee just as a matter of course. My roommate became a vet studying at Tuskegee. I know several veterinarians who went through the School of Agriculture and went on to Tuskegee to become veterinarians. So Booker T. Washington, you could say, was very Pan-Africanist in his outlook.
Well, in many ways he was. I mean, first of all, they had already been talking about even before A. Sylvester Williams, through his Pan-African Congress, you had one of Booker T. Washington's boys, one of his followers, T. Thomas Fortune, already talking about forming an association of black people in different countries. So the idea was sort of around, it was floating around. So, this whole question about, I say as a historian, I'm of the opinion that, I never take the position. What the saying is, does the person make history or does the time make the person? And I'm of the opinion that they always both work together. So this idea of black people uniting across, it was already in the air. It had been in the air for a while. But it took, and I think Garvey came at an excellent time, where he had enough people before him that did it wrong or didn't get it off the ground as well. That's not even saying that Garvey necessarily did it all right, but he did it.
Well, speaking of Garvey, I'm going to kind of diverge a little bit, but not because if you're talking economics, if you're talking money matters, you're really talking Garvey. But in terms of Pan-Africanism, Garvey is credited with Africa for Africans, those at home and those abroad. And I want you to talk to us about Edward Wilmot Blyden, who is credited with having put that forth before Garvey.
Yes. Now Blyden meant that term in 2 ways. So when Blyden is in Africa, everyone about Blyden is from the West Indies, from St. Croix.
Go Caribbean again.
Yeah. And so, well, first of all, in this whole movement, in this whole exchange, African Caribbeans are playing a prominent role. I mean, they're there from the very beginning. It's not like there's ever really a separation. We've always had people from the Caribbean coming here and participating in the struggle, because it's part of the same struggle, right? It's the same struggle, actually. A lot of times America is left out of a lot of situations because America wants to be left out.
Especially if they end up in Harlem.
Right.
At that time.
See, most of the time they don't come up. First of all, during the period of enslavement, folks from the Caribbean typically, they're not going to go down south. Why would they? Right? They're not there but torture and mistreatment, right? So you come up north where you have a better opportunity. Right?
Maybe that's why I never went to Alabama.
Huh?
That's a part of why I never went to Alabama, to Tuskegee.
Right. That's the wrong place to go, right? Because a lot of times what's going to happen too is because you're a black person and you're not falling into the southern mores, they're coming after you real quick. The Klan will say, "Yeah, you got to teach these farm Negroes a lesson."
Yeah, that would have been me. So I never went.
They would have got you, because actually, even black folks that challenged the Klan, they had to leave the South. They couldn't stay down there. They had to come to New York. Many people came because they got in trouble down south. They challenged authority. They had to come up here. So at any rate, but you always had this, this influx. You got, even before then, you got what's his name, Prince Hall. Prince Hall is important because he establishes the Masons, and for a long time, the Masons was one of the main vehicles that black men could do progressive things through that type of organizing. And the Masons are there involved in organizing. Even when you have people like A. Philip Randolph doing his organizing, he's doing it through a lot of black Masons are the ones that are the people that's supporting this and behind this, And so it's Prince Hall that really established Masons where black men could go and be proud, right? It's not so much that it was African-centered as much as you can be black and proud. That was important. But anyway, so Edward Blyden, he comes here. He's brought here by a white American who sees that he's a very bright child. And the Reverend, I forgot his name, I should know it. He's a minister. So Blyden comes and he gets he's educated to be a minister, right? And he stays here for a good number of years and begins to get more involved in the abolitionist movement. But Blyden doesn't take well to the racism that's here. Right? It's a little too much for him. And so he decides to get involved with the American Colonization Society, an organization that is sending black folks back to Africa. And he's one of the guys that goes back. And he becomes one of their main officials in Liberia. He's like their go-to guy. He's the one telling them you know, what he wants, how many people he needs, and they're pretty much complying with it, right? Now, on this end, in terms of the states, a number of African Americans become anti the American Colonization Society because they see it as a way of getting rid of free black people and now just more tightly fastening slavery. And it became a big issue. There's another famous person of Jamaican ancestry that came to America who started a newspaper, John Rushmore, and he starts writing pro articles for going back to Africa. And oh man, he got into a lot of trouble. But he eventually goes back. He goes back to Liberia as well. So you got people going back. And Blyden is there just having people come back. So now Blyden had a unique problem because while Blyden is in Liberia, a lot of the blacks that are coming back, they are mulattoes. Or they're mixed, right? And these guys are taking pride in themselves being mixed. And then you got at the same time, Blyden and these guys, Blyden is of Igbo descent, and he knows it. You got a lot of guys coming back who, are unmixed Africans, right? Or don't look like it, look unmixed. And so there a power struggle develops in Liberia, and the mulattoes begin to gain power. This period in history is called the mulatto ascendancy. It's happening in Haiti. It's happening wherever you have mulattoes. Like, they're banding together. So Blyden tells the American Colonization Society, stop sending me back mulattoes. Says, I only want unmixed Africans. And that's when he comes up with the term Africa for the Africans. The term is not developed because of necessarily because of the Europeans colonizing Africa. Because remember, Blyden goes back in the 1860s, in the 70s and 80s. I think he dies, in the 90s. So the Berlin Conference hadn't taken full effect yet. You see what I'm saying? He could see it coming, however. He was able to see it because he saw what was happening in Nigeria because he was aware. Because Blyden is a scholar. He speaks about 4 or 5 languages. He speaks Hebrew. He speaks Latin. He speaks, of course, English and a couple of others. And he's writing in different languages. He's translating stuff. So he's doing a lot of stuff. And so he becomes one of the first big scholars, that actually goes back to Africa. And he's writing at the same time that you got in America, you have Delaney writing about Africa. You got Blyden writing about Africa. At the same time, you got the Haitian author, Antonin Furman writing. So all this stuff is happening at the same time. But Blyden stops wanting mulattoes there because he feels that they are damaging the politics of Liberia. And because Blyden is an intellectual, he begins to theorize about why the mulatto is a problem. And as a result, he develops this complex theory about, mulattoes. And he begins to argue for racial purity. And so Garvey, he adopts this going back to Africa, he even adopts the slogan of Africa for the Africans, but Garvey has to reincorporate the diaspora because that's part of his plan. He knows Garvey's plan is to build a superpower in Africa, and his audience is primarily Africans from the diaspora. So Garvey then, he adds in for those at home and those abroad. Because originally, Blyden was trying to get people from back home, from the Americas to come, but he had a bad experience with them because, and this is what happens, when the American Colonization Society, they complied with Blyden. They stopped sending back mulattoes, you see, to the best they could. They stopped it, they complied with it. And what Blyden found out was that the unmixed Africans were coming back just as brainwashed as the ones that were mixed. That their value system was also messed up. And that's when he said, don't send me back nobody from over there.
Well,
that's Africa for the Africans. He wanted to develop the talent in the minds of people already back home.
We're going to fast forward to the 1980s, and hear what another philosopher had to say about it all. Someone you knew and I knew, and he goes by the name of Safi Allah Abdullah today. He says, Africa is burning, and the black man is doing the freak. Tells you when this was written, when people were doing the freak.
Outrageous fire spreads across the continent in search of a new victim to lock up under the flames of injustice. Africa is burning, and the black man here is doing the freak. On the screens of a boiling overdose, systematically controlled by idiots of the White House, with twisted grins and stale peanuts. Africa is burning, and the black man here is doing the freak. Hypnotized by a funny light music, spelled into a dance trance, as you shake your booty down in the name of disco. Africa is burning, and the black man here is doing the freak. Chambers of non-stop insanity, patrolled by Captain America's Boogaloo Incorporated in integrated suicidal settings. Africa is burning, and the black man is doing the freak. My brothers and sisters dressed up in cultural attire, not realizing that it's more to being black than just talking about it. Africa is burning, and the black man is doing the free. Tight jeans and Elton John sunglasses, Pierre Cardin sneakers and a bag of smoke. Africa is burning, and the black man is doing the free. Save the babies, rescue the children. Save the babies, rescue the children. Save the babies, rescue the children. Save the babies, rescue the children.
Ah, yes, there's more to being black than just talking about it, says Safi, and I agree with him. There is more to being black than just talking about it. But we do have to talk about it, and those of you who, those, those of you who caught our virtual version of Reggae Culture Salute last year might remember Safi Abdullah doing the libation to get us started. This year, we're actually going to be doing a real live Reggae Culture Salute, and I did jump the gun on Thursday in my excitement and mentioned that we will be paying tribute to Dennis Brown. So I'm jumping the gun again because I'm just excited about paying tribute to Dennis Brown. And hey, maybe we should just listen to some Dennis Brown right now. How about that? Ah, yes. His very first hit, 1969, I believe.
No man is an island. No man stands alone. Treat each man as a brother, and remember each man's dream as your own. Now we need one another, oh yes, and we ought to try to be friends. Each man has a brother, and each man has a friend. You can't live in this world all by yourself. No, 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 you can't make it alone. And just as sure as you try to make it by yourself, you're gonna wake up and find you're gonna need somebody else. No man is an island. Oh yes. No man stands alone. Each man has a brother, and remember, each man's dream has your own. Whoa.
Okay. You're going to be hearing a lot of Dennis Brown around here over the next 4 months from now through October 30th, when we will be doing Reggae Culture Salute with a very special tribute to Dennis Brown. And I'm beginning to do some research and just found out that a very dear friend of mine who I haven't seen or heard from or had any contact with in more than 50 years was very instrumental in grooming Dennis back in this time, back in the late 60s, early 70s, when he first went to Studio One, where he did that particular track. And we're going to be sharing a lot of history about Dennis over the next few months. Like I said, I jumped the gun because we're really going to be doing this in earnest in August. But Dennis is special to me. I met Dennis before he did this track, which he was 12, I believe, when he did this, and he already had a career. Of course, the story is he had to stand on a crate, a beer box or something, when he would perform with Byron Lee and the Dragonaires, and someone who would perform with him back then is going to be one of the artists paying tribute to Dennis on October 30th. You want to mark your calendar and plan to be in the house. We're going to be in this place I'm really excited to be in as well. It's called Brick House. Brick House, downtown Brooklyn, is it's a hubbub for arts and media and television and radio, and you can learn editing and all of that there. And they have this ballroom that is just right for what we're going to be doing. So that's sorted, and we'll be talking about Dennis Brown over the next 4 months. Like I said, we really get started in earnest in August, but I just can't not talk about Dennis right now, because Dennis is top of mind for me as we move towards Reggae Culture Salute. Siva, did you want to say anything?
No, I'm good.
Well, we're just about coming to the end. We have another 5 minutes or so. And just to recap, I guess, what would you say are the liberty lessons of this evening's program? It's the Money Matters.
We've been over so many things.
Money has been central to all of them, whether or not just...
So money is definitely key. I mean, and, I always think about, Dr. Benji Condon, Dr. Ben, he wrote a book one time called The Saga of the Black Nationalists versus the Black Marxists Continues. Right?
The saga of
the Black Marxists versus the Black Nationalists continues.
By the way, speaking of that, let me interrupt you just to say that you mentioned when you were talking about Blyden, you mentioned Trotskyism and Leninism and Marxism and a whole lot of isms that...
When I was talking about Fanon, not Fanon, I'm talking about the other guy, Nurse.
Not C.L.R. James, but
no, that's the other guy.
Padmore.
Padmore, yeah, George Padmore. Yeah,
George Padmore, right? But I'm just bringing it up because we don't have time to talk about it now. But at a future time, we need to say what those are and what the distinctions between them are, and what do the Trotskyites believe as opposed to the Marxists, as opposed to the Leninists, and the various degrees of socialism, I guess, or communism, depending on how you view it. And in fact, what is socialism versus communism is a conversation we need to have. But I did interrupt you just to say that. Go ahead.
No problem. I think maybe I'll do a distorted truth on that.
Okay.
Maybe I'll do that.
But Dr. Ben wrote this book about the saga of the...
Yeah, you're right. Of the Black Marxists versus the Black Nationalists. And basically the theme was that, we keep arguing, the Marxists, Leninists versus the Black Nationalists. And it's not about either. It's we got to get past both of those things, and overcome what we need to overcome. It's not.
Amen. I'm over both of those things myself.
Yeah. So a lot of times, so I'm always figuring out how are we gonna get out of this. How are we gonna get out of this mess? And then when I think about the economics of it all, I have abandoned capitalism as I know it and understand it. I definitely don't think that that's the way to go at all.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Capitalism as I know and understand it, that is clearly not the way to go.
Unless you want to remain a slave, but go ahead.
Yes, so the new system that we set up, it has to have all the necessary safeguards that will allow us to have enough wealth to sponsor our various programs. Not unless we're just going to set up a whole new system of bartering versus. So I don't know.
It's called community economic development. Is what I studied, and it really looks at extracting the best of both worlds, but with a primary focus of really converting consumers into producers and folk who have ownership and control of their well-being. And I don't know any other way. I certainly know capitalism is not the way for anybody except the Jeff Bezoses of the world, the capitalists who own and control, the means of production, and who, by virtue of that ownership and control of the means of production, pretty much own and control the labor that must work those means of production. Well, the means of production really are labor and capital, and they control capital, and capital controls labor, and that's not going to get us there. And, I could do a whole program on this as well, so, because I am passionate about that. But yeah, we must, however, address the issue of our relationship to money. It's why we do Money Matters, and it's why we do it in a way that is not academic, and we're not studying, capitalist theory or Marxist theory or, socialist, but we're talking about raising the social living quotient. It really comes down to raising the social living quotient, and that's what distinguishes us. That's what distinguishes what we're talking about here from capitalism. It really is about raising the social living quotient and just lifting up people. And let's be clear that it doesn't happen without resources, and perhaps ownership and control of resources is what we need to be talking about in going forward when it comes to Money Matters. Your final words, Sable.
Well, you say that, and the other week I was talking about some of the countries that I see in Africa that are making really, really good moves. I'm not sure, but it seems like they're still following the same capitalist model. So I'm concerned.
Absolutely, they are. That's why when you talk about, the brother in Tanzania, no, the brother who just died in Tanzania, I don't think that he was necessarily aligned with Nyerere and the whole Ujamaa modality when it comes to economics. So I differ with you there about him and him being a disciple of Nyerere. Julius Nyerere really sought to develop cooperative economics in Tanzania, and I don't think that model has been followed at all in terms of, I think folk have kind of fell back on the capitalist model.
It seems like that's the case.
I'm sorry?
That seems to be true.
Absolutely. So I'm not feeling about him the way you are, but we're out of time, and a little more Dennis Brown to take us out. We'll be back next week for Social Living, and of course, join me on Thursday for Real Talk. It's the Reggae Futures edition. A little Dennis Brown to take us home. Chang, 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 ching, chang, chang.
While life goes on.
Saber, stand by. I need to speak with you.